The Crestron panel in Cole Harrington's foyer still glowed its ambient blue, casting shadows across Italian marble that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. But money could muffle the sound cutting through 47 floors of luxury. A baby's cry, raw and desperate, the kind that pierces straight through a parent's chest and demands action. Cole's bare feet made no sound as he moved down the hallway, his $2,000 silk pajamas whispering against his skin. The nursery door stood slightly ajar, soft light spilling into the corridor like a promise. Inside, the snoo bassinet, engineered to soothe any infant back to sleep, sat motionless and defeated. Its gentle vibrations and white noise had failed. Again, for 3 nights, 2-month-old Theo had rejected every bottle, every formula, every carefully measured attempt to nourish him. The baby's cries had become the soundtrack of a household in crisis, echoing off smart home speakers and through encrypted surveillance feeds that recorded everything except how to fix this. Cole reached for the door handle, expecting to find his son still writhing in the bassinet, tiny fists clenched against invisible pain. What he found instead stopped his breath. Naomi Johnson sat in the antique rocking chair Victoria had chosen for those peaceful midnight feedings that never came to pass. But this wasn't the woman Cole employed to maintain schedules and sanitize surfaces. This was someone else entirely. A mother, cradling his son against her chest, Theo's tiny mouth working steadily, contentedly, his miniature fist pressed against her dark skin like he was anchoring himself to safety. The room held perfect silence except for the soft sounds of nursing, the tiny swallows, the whispered, "There you go, baby," that seemed to come from some ancient place of knowing. Naomi's hand curved protectively around Theo's head, her thumb stroking the fine hair that caught the nightlight's glow. For the first time in 72 hours, Cole's son looked peaceful. Every carefully drafted contract sat between them in that moment. Every non-disclosure agreement, every intimate contact clause, every legal boundary designed to protect the Harrington family from exactly this kind of exposure. 18 months of employment, built on professional distance and documented protocols, dissolve in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Cole's hand remained frozen on the doorframe. His boardroom instincts screamed liability, breach of contract, immediate termination. The estate lawyer's voice echoed in his memory. These provisions exist to protect you from claims, from complications, from situations that blur professional lines. But standing there in his son's nursery at 2:17 a.m., watching his employee feed his child with her own body, Cole felt something crack open in his chest that had nothing to do with corporate policy and everything to do with a father's desperate gratitude. Naomi looked up then, her eyes meeting us across the softly lit room. No apology, no panic, just steady recognition of what she'd done and why. In her gaze, he saw the same equation he'd been calculating for 3 sleepless nights. A hungry baby, failed systems, and the kind of choice that reveals who you really are when everything else falls away. The smart home sensors registered his presence, automatically adjusting the temperature by 2 degrees. Somewhere in the penthouse, servers logged the timestamp. Security feeds captured angles and shadows. But none of that technology could measure what was actually happening in this room. The moment when rules met reality and discovered they weren't the same thing at all. How did it come to this? How does a billion-dollar empire, designed to anticipate and prevent every possible crisis, end up depending on the compassion of a woman paid to clean floors and organize closets? And what happens next when the weight of legal contracts collides with the simple, ancient act of feeding a hungry child? Some boundaries once crossed can never be uncrossed. Some choices change everything. And sometimes in the quiet darkness of a Manhattan night, the most revolutionary act isn't building an empire. It's watching it transform in the arms of someone brave enough to break every rule that matters. The Harrington household operated like a Swiss timepiece, each gear calibrated to protect a fortune that could fund small nations. Every morning at precisely 7 a.m., Miles Clayton would arrive with his leather portfolio, tablet loaded with overnight security reports, staff schedules, and a checklist that governed 47 floors of domestic perfection. Miles had managed high-net-worth families for 15 years, and the Harringtons were his masterpiece of operational efficiency. Camera feeds from 12 Nanit Pro units streamed to encrypted servers, monitored by both his team and Blackstone Security Solutions. Motion sensors tracked foot traffic patterns. Even the smart refrigerator logged who accessed what, when, and for how long. Privacy wasn't just protected, it was weaponized. The contracts told a real story. 62 pages of legal architecture designed by white shoe attorneys who understood that wealth attracts lawsuits like lightning rods attract storms. Every employee signed identical agreements. Comprehensive NDAs covering family schedules, financial details, medical information, and guest lists. Background checks went back 3 generations. References were verified through private investigators, not phone calls. But it was Section 12.3 that mattered most. The intimate contact clause that explicitly prohibited any nursing, medical procedures, or physical caregiving beyond bottle feeding and diaper changes. The language was crystal clear. Employee agrees that all childcare activities requiring bodily contact beyond standard feeding, bathing, and safety supervision must be performed by licensed medical professionals or immediate family members only. Naomi's signature sat at the bottom of page 47, dated 18 months ago, her careful cursive binding her to rules written by people who'd never held a crying baby at 3 a.m. Victoria's absence had created cracks in this perfect system. She left for upstate New York 3 weeks after Theo's birth, her obstetrician recommending intensive postpartum therapy at a private facility where meadows replaced marble and silence replaced surveillance. The master suite fell hollow without her, Cole sleeping on Egyptian cotton sheets that still carried the ghost of her perfume. Her recovery was essential, but it left gaps that protocols couldn't fill. Victoria was supposed to establish breastfeeding routines, manage night feedings, make those instinctive maternal decisions that no employee handbook could codify. Instead, those responsibilities fell to Luisa Vargas, the head nanny, whose own children lived with her sister in Queens while she managed other people's midnight crises. The pharmacy era began as a simple substitution. Similac Alimentum replaced by a standard formula when a new technician misread the prescription. Such a small mistake in a system designed to prevent any mistakes at all. Dr. Patricia Williams had left 3 voicemails on a house line, her tone escalating from professional concern to urgent alarm as Theo's weight dropped and his symptoms intensified. But those calls landed in Miles's administrative queue, filed under non-emergency medical correspondence, while a 2-month-old baby starved in a nursery worth more than most people's homes. The smart bassinet recorded every cry, documented every restless hour, but couldn't translate desperation into actionable intelligence. By February 13th, Theo had rejected bottles for 60 hours straight. His tiny body was burning through reserves he didn't have, his skin taking on that papery quality that pediatric nurses recognize immediately. The donor milk delivery, ordered as an emergency backup, sat delayed in a facility across town, held up by paperwork and Valentine's Day logistics. Rules designed to protect had become barriers to survival, and somewhere in that gap between policy and reality, a choice was made that would shatter everything the contracts were meant to preserve. Type protocol if you've ever broken rules to save someone you love. 6 months earlier, Naomi Johnson's morning routine in her Harlem studio apartment looked nothing like the sterile efficiency of the Harrington penthouse. Parker would wake at 6:15 a.m., his 5-year-old energy already vibrating through their shared space as she prepared for another 17-hour day juggling 3 jobs that barely covered rent. The lactation had been her secret weapon through Parker's early years. Even after he started kindergarten, she maintained her milk supply through brief morning sessions, a practice that seemed eccentric until she realized the extra income potential. Donor milk networks paid well for healthy, tested supplies, and Naomi's body had always been generous in its production. Her financial tightrope stretched across multiple lifelines: morning shift at Mercy General's cafeteria, afternoon housekeeping for 2 Upper West Side families, and the crown jewel, her position with the Harringtons. That job alone paid more than the other 2 combined, with benefits that included Parker's dental coverage and her own health insurance for the first time in 7 years. The Harrington contract represented escape velocity from a cycle that had trapped her mother and grandmother: steady income, predictable hours, a reference letter that could open doors to estate management positions that paid actual living wages. Everything she'd worked toward since Parker's father disappeared when she was 3 months pregnant. But maintaining her milk supply had become more than financial strategy. It was muscle memory, her body's way of staying ready for emergencies she hoped would never come. Each morning, while Parker ate cereal and watched cartoons, she would express in store, her movements automatic as breathing. February 13th changed everything. Naomi had worked late that Tuesday, organizing Victoria's closet and preparing the nursery for another difficult night. She was heading home when she heard them. Theo's cries cutting to the penthouse's expensive soundproofing like broken glass. Those weren't normal newborn fussiness. These were the desperate, hoarse wails of real hunger, the kind that Parker had made during his worst nights when formula couldn't settle his stomach and her own milk was the only thing that brought peace. She knew that sound. Every mother knows that sound. Naomi's keys were already in her hand, 1 foot out the service elevator, when Theo's crying intensified. She'd seen Louisa trying bottle after bottle, watched the formula get poured down the sink and used, noticed how the baby's face had grown more angular over the past 3 days. The smart bassinet's gentle motions weren't soothing. They were taunting a child whose body was rejecting everything offered to it. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Parker's asleep. Take your time getting home." The apartment felt so far away suddenly. The subway ride, the walk up 4 flights, the morning shift at the hospital that started in 5 hours. All of it felt impossible, while a baby cried with particular desperation she recognized from her own son's hardest nights. The internal calculation happened in seconds. Job security against moral duty. 18 months of perfect employment records against the baby's immediate need. The contract she'd signed against the contract written on her heart when she became a mother. She turned around and rode the elevator back up to the penthouse. In the nursery, Louisa had finally surrendered to exhaustion, leaving Theo in his bassinet while she dozed in a rocking chair. Naomi lifted him carefully, feeling his tiny ribs through his onesie, the way his body molded against her chest like puzzle pieces finding their match. His rooting was immediate and desperate, the instinctive search for nourishment that every mammal is born knowing how to do. "Some things matter more than paychecks," she whispered against his downy head, settling into the chair as her body responded to his need with the efficiency of millions of years of evolution. For 43 minutes, the penthouse knew peace. Theo's tiny hand found her collarbone, his breathing settled into the rhythm of contentment, and Naomi felt the fierce satisfaction that comes from solving a problem no amount of money or technology could fix. She knew the consequences, understood the legal exposure, could already imagine Miles Clayton's shocked face and the termination letter being drafted in real time. But sitting there in the pre-dawn darkness, feeling Theo's trust in every sleepy swallow, Naomi also understood something else entirely. Sometimes courage looks like breaking every rule that stands between love and survival. Now, meeting Cole's eyes across that same room, she lifted her chin and prepared for everything she'd known would come next. Cole's mind shifted into crisis management mode with the mechanical precision that had built his empire. Standing in that doorway, Watching his employee nurse his son, the CEO's voice took immediate control. Liability assessment, reputation management, containment strategy. The familiar mental checklist activated like muscle memory. Document the incident. Identify legal exposure. Minimize damage. Protect the brand. 15 years of building Harrington Financial Technologies from a 3-person startup into a fintech giant had rewired his brain for exactly these moments. When the SEC investigation threatened to destroy everything in 2019, Cole had methodically dismantled their case piece by piece. When a former business partner leaked confidential algorithms to TechCrunch, he'd turned the scandal into a competitive advantage through strategic transparency, control through data, victory through preparation, problem solved through process. His mental dashboard lit up with red alerts: breach of contract, unauthorized medical procedure, potential litigation vectors, media exposure risks. The settlement attorneys would need briefs by noon. The PR firm would require talking points for damage control. The board would demand explanations for how household staff gained access to intimate family situations. This is a clear violation of Section 12.3. His boardroom voice declared internally, already drafting termination language and severance calculations. Immediate dismissal with cause. Non-disclosure enforcement. Reputation protection protocols activated. But another part of his mind, the part that existed before IPOs and quarterly earnings reports, kept returning to the image that refused to fit any corporate framework. Theo's face. His son's first peaceful expression in 72 hours. The tiny fist pressed against Naomi's collarbone like an anchor. The complete stillness that had replaced days of desperate crying. Cole Harrington had built his fortune by quantifying everything that mattered. Customer acquisition costs, lifetime value metrics, churn analysis, conversion optimization. Every business decision filtered through spreadsheets and algorithms that removed emotion from strategy. But standing there at 2:17 a.m., he couldn't find a formula that made a hungry baby's comfort fit into liability calculations. His empire had started in a Brooklyn garage where he'd coded payment processing software, while Victoria brought him coffee and belief in equal measure. Back then, success meant making rent and proving that a kid from Detroit could compete with Harvard MBAs who'd inherited their seed funding. Every line of code was personal. Every client wouldn't felt like survival. The billions had changed that intimacy into infrastructure. Private jets replaced subway commutes. Board meetings replaced garage conversations. Strategic planning replaced gut instinct. He'd gained the world and somehow lost the ability to trust his own heart when it mattered most. Now that heart was at war with his head. The CEO demanded immediate termination and legal action. The father whispered gratitude to the woman who'd solved what all his money and technology couldn't fix. The husband wondered what Victoria would think when she learned another woman had fed their child while she recovered from the birth that nearly killed her. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he scrolled to Miles Clayton's contact. 2:23 a.m. His estate manager would be awake within 15 minutes of receiving the call, part of the comprehensive emergency response system that governed every aspect of household operations. The conversation would be brief and decisive. Miles understood crisis management as well as Cole did. Staff meetings could be arranged within hours. Termination paperwork could be executed by breakfast. The machine could eliminate this problem before it became a liability. But as his thumb hovered over Miles's number, Cole found himself looking back at the nursery where his son slept soundly against the chest of someone who'd risked everything to feed him. The same woman who organized his closets, cleaned his floors, and apparently cared more about Theo's well-being than the 62 pages of legal armor designed to protect them all. The call connected on the first ring. Miles. Emergency staff meeting. 8 a.m. Kitchen. All hands. Sir is everything. Just make it happen. Cole ended the call and stared at his reflection in the hallway mirror. In 6 hours, he would discover whether 15 years of corporate success had completely erased a man who once believed that doing right mattered more than being right. Miles Clayton's investigation began at 3:47 a.m. with a stack of medical records, delivery receipts, and pharmacy documentation that told the story of a system's catastrophic breakdown. His laptop screen illuminated the kitchen island as he reconstructed the chain of failures that led to a 2-month-old baby starving in a penthouse worth $50 million. The pharmacy error was documented in black and white. CVS prescription number 4472891, originally written for Similac Alimentum hypoallergenic formula, had been substituted with standard Similac Advance on February 10th. The technician's initials, JAM, appeared on the substitution form alongside a timestamp of 2:34 p.m. No secondary verification. No consultation with the prescribing physician. Just a simple mistake that set everything else in motion. Dr. Patricia Williams' prescription pad still sat in Theo's medical file, her handwriting clear and specific. Alimentum only due to suspected CMPA. Cow's milk protein allergy. The kind of condition that turns routine feeding into medical necessity, where the wrong formula doesn't just cause discomfort, it causes systematic rejection and failure to thrive. Miles pulled up Louisa's digital logs, the feeding schedule she meticulously maintained since Victoria's departure. February 10th showed her signature, approving the pharmacy delivery without cross-referencing the prescription. Her notes read, "Formula delivery received. 6-can Similac is ordered." No verification. No double-checking. Just the assumption that systems designed to prevent errors had actually prevented them. The paper trail revealed deeper cracks in the household's operational armor. New York Milk Bank's delivery confirmation showed an order placed February 11 for emergency donor milk, pasteurized, tested, and specifically formulated for infants with feeding difficulties. But the approval process had stalled in administrative bureaucracy, insurance pre-authorization, medical necessity documentation, Valentine's Day shipping delays. A baby's hunger reduced the paperwork sitting in some clerk's inbox. Theo's medical records painted the clearest picture of systemic failure. Birth weight, 8 pounds, 4 ounces, 91st percentile for gestational age. February 11th wellness check, 8 pounds, 1 ounce, still healthy but showing signs of feeding resistance. February 13th emergency weigh-in performed by Louisa using the smart scale in the nursery, 7 pounds, 12 ounces. A 4-day drop that pushed him from the 91st percentile to the 75th, his tiny body consuming itself while surrounded by every luxury money could buy. Dr. Williams's voicemails told their own story of mounting desperation. Message 1, February 11th, 11:23 a.m. Hi, this is Dr. Williams calling about Theo's feeding difficulties. Please call me back to discuss the formula substitution. Professional, routine, optimistic that adult competence would solve a simple problem. Message 2, February 12th for 17 p.m. This is Dr. Williams again. I'm concerned about the weight loss we discussed. Has the hypoallergenic formula been reordered? Please return my call immediately. The first crack of worry creeping into her voice. Message 3, February 13th, 8:45 a.m. This is an urgent call regarding Theo Harrington. He needs to be seen today if the feeding issues haven't resolved. The weight loss pattern is concerning and requires immediate intervention. Call my emergency line. Fear masquerading as medical professionalism. All 3 messages have been routed to Miles's administrative queue, filed under routine medical correspondence by an automated system that couldn't distinguish between prescription renewals and pediatric emergencies. They sat unheard while a baby's cries echoed through marble hallways and smart home speakers that recorded everything except the sound of systems failing the children they were designed to protect. Type failed. if you've seen systems break, when lives depend on them. February 14th, 8 a.m. The Harrington kitchen had never felt like a courtroom until this morning. Miles Clayton arranged the employment contracts across the Carrara Marble Island like evidence files, each 62-page document representing a legal fortress that someone had just breached. The morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated pages of legal text that suddenly felt fragile as tissue paper. Luisa Vargas sat at the breakfast nook, her hands shaking as she clutched a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. Tears tracked down her cheeks in steady streams. Not the dramatic sobbing of someone seeking sympathy, but the quiet devastation of a professional whose competence had been called into question. 23 years of childcare experience reduced to a signature on a delivery receipt she should have verified. The night nurse, Cassandra Williams, stood near the service entrance looking genuinely bewildered. Her shift had ended at 6 a.m., 2 hours before the emergency meeting was called, and she'd been summoned back from her Queens apartment with no explanation beyond immediate presence required. Still wearing yesterday's scrubs, she kept glancing between the contracts and her colleagues, trying to piece together what crisis had erupted while she slept. Marcus, the head of housekeeping, leaned against the Sub-Zero refrigerator with the careful posture of someone who'd spent 30 years working in wealthy households. He understood the rhythm of these meetings. Someone was about to be sacrificed to protect the family's reputation, and survival meant staying invisible until the storm passed. Miles had prepared for this moment with a thoroughness that made him indispensable to high-net-worth families. 3 termination letters sat in his leather portfolio, resignation agreements pre-drafted, severance calculations complete. He'd handled similar breaches of contract before: the nanny who'd overstepped boundaries, the housekeeper who'd violated confidentiality, the driver who'd made unauthorized stops. Clean, swift, protective, Naomi sat apart from the others, her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap with the dignity of someone who'd already accepted her fate. She'd changed from her work clothes into a simple black dress, the kind you wear to funerals or final conversations. Her eyes were clear, unafraid, carrying a particular strength that comes from knowing you've done the right thing regardless of the consequences. At 8:03 a.m., Cole Harrington entered his kitchen wearing jeans and a Columbia University sweatshirt instead of his usual Tom Ford suits. His hair was uncombed, his face carrying the weight of a sleepless night spent questioning everything he thought he knew about leadership and responsibility. The staff tensed, preparing for the corporate fury they'd witnessed during previous crises. Miles straightened, ready to present his termination recommendations. Luisa's tears flowed faster, anticipating professional execution. Cassandra clutched her purse strap, calculating how quickly she could find another position. But Cole didn't reach for the contracts. He didn't demand explanations or assign blame. Instead, he moved to the center of the kitchen and did something none of them expected. He sat down at their level, pulling out a chair at the breakfast table like he was joining a family conversation rather than conducting an inquisition. "A child was starving," he began, his voice carrying none of the boredom authority they'd learned to fear. "Someone in this room acted to save him. We failed him first." The silence that followed felt like the moment after lightning strikes, when you're not sure if you've been hit or spared. Naomi's careful composure cracked slightly, confusion replacing her resigned acceptance. Miles set down his portfolio, like it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. "The pharmacy error happened on our watch. The unanswered medical calls sat in our system. The delayed donor milk got caught in our bureaucracy. By the time someone had the courage to solve this problem, our procedures had already put my son's health at risk." Cole's gaze swept across each face, but when it landed on Naomi, there was no accusation, only acknowledgement. 18 months ago, you signed a contract written by lawyers who never held a crying baby. Last night, You chose to ignore that contract to save a child who couldn't save himself. That wasn't a breach of employment terms. That was moral leadership. Louisa's sobbing stopped abruptly, her coffee mug suspended halfway to her lips. Marcus straightened from his careful invisibility, processing this complete inversion of expected consequences. Cassandra slowly released her death grip on her purse, beginning to understand that this wasn't the termination meeting she'd assumed. Miles opened his mouth to interject. Liability concerns, legal precedents, reputation management. But Cole raised a hand that suggested the conversation was far from over. We're going to fix this. All of it. The procedures that let a hungry baby slip through our safeguards. The contracts that prioritize legal protection over human decency. The hierarchy that made someone risk her livelihood to do what all of us should have done days ago. Naomi's eyes filled with tears for the first time since this crisis began, but these weren't tears of shame or fear. They were the tears of someone who'd been prepared to fall on her sword, and instead found herself being handed the keys to help rebuild the castle. Cole reached across the marble island and picked up one of the contracts, its legal weight feeling different in his hands now that he understood its limitations. These documents were written to protect us from liability. They ended up protecting us from humanity instead. He turned to page 47, where Naomi's signature had bound her to restrictions that nearly cost his son his health. Section 12.3 gets rewritten today. We're adding what I'm calling the compassion clause, emergency care provisions that prioritize medical necessity over procedural compliance, always under appropriate medical guidance. Miles shifted uncomfortably, his estate management training colliding with this complete departure from standard wealthy household operations. Sir, the liability implications are my responsibility, Cole finished. Not yours, not theirs. He gestured toward the staff, who were still processing this reversal of everything they thought they knew about their employer. I've already contacted the Human Milk Banking Association of North America. We're establishing partnerships with 3 accredited milk banks in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. Emergency deliveries, pre-screened donors, medical oversight for any cross-nursing situations. Louisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice barely above a whisper. You mean we're not being terminated? You're being promoted, Cole replied, his attention shifting to Naomi. I want you to help design the new protocols. You understood what was happening to Theo before any of us did. Your judgment saved his health, possibly his life. I need that judgment helping us prevent this from ever happening again. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she processed this complete inversion of expected consequences. 24 hours ago, she'd been risking her livelihood to feed a hungry baby. Now she was being asked to reshape the very system that had created the crisis. I don't understand, she said quietly. I violated my contract. I broke the rules. You broke the rules to serve a higher principle, Cole corrected. That's not just acceptable. It's exactly what I want everyone in this household to do when human welfare is at stake. Marcus straightened from his position by the refrigerator, his 30 years of household service providing no template for this kind of conversation. In his experience, wealthy families protected their interests first, their reputation second, and their staff's moral concerns never made the list at all. Cassandra found her voice first. What does this mean for our day-to-day operations? It means we trust each other, Cole said. It means medical emergencies get handled by people with medical judgment, not people with legal training. It means if you see a problem that our procedures can't solve, you solve it first and worry about the paperwork later. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from David Weinstock, the family's primary attorney. Cole glanced at the screen and declined the call. The legal team is going to hate this. They'll say it sets precedent we can't control. They'll draft memos about exposure and liability and reputation risk. Miles couldn't help himself. Sir, they're not wrong about the precedent. Good, Cole replied. I want other families to follow this precedent. I want household staff to know they won't be punished for choosing compassion over compliance. I want children protected by people who care about them, not just employed by people who pay them. The kitchen fell silent except for the subtle hum of luxury appliances and the distant sound of Manhattan traffic 47 floors below. Each person was mentally rewriting their understanding of their employment, their responsibilities, and their relationship to family that controlled their professional lives. Victoria's return loomed over all of it, the question mark that could either validate this revolution or destroy it entirely. She arrived tomorrow morning to find her household transformed, her contracts rewritten, and her husband chained by decisions made while she recovered from bringing their son into the world. What will Mrs. Harrington think? Louisa asked, voicing concern they were all carrying. Cole's expression softened with something that looked like hope mixed with uncertainty. We're about to find out if the woman I married still exists underneath the postpartum depression and the trauma of almost losing her life giving birth to our son. The revolution was just beginning. February 15th, 11:47 a.m. Victoria Harrington stepped to the penthouse's private elevator doors, carrying 3 weeks of accumulated exhaustion and a fragile hope that felt as delicate as spun glass. The Meadowbrook Recovery Center had taught her to breathe through panic attacks and identify cognitive distortions, but nothing had prepared her for the subtle shift in energy that greeted her homecoming. The household moved differently. Quieter conversations between staff members. Naomi organizing the linen closet with a confidence that hadn't existed before Victoria's departure. Even Miles seemed less rigid, his usual military precision softened by something that looked almost like relief. Cole met her in the foyer with Theo sleeping peacefully in his arms. The first time she'd seen her son completely calm since those terrifying early days when nothing seemed to work. Her husband looked different too, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual business armor, his face carrying new lines that spoke of recent transformation rather than stress. He's gained 8 ounces, Cole said softly, passing their son into her arms. Dr. Williams says his weight percentile is back to normal range. Victoria felt Theo's solid warmth against her chest, his tiny fingers curling around her thumb with the trust that had seemed so elusive during those first desperate weeks. How? She whispered. The formula issues, the constant crying. What changed? Cole's hesitation lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. We need to talk. The conversation happened in the nursery where everything had changed 5 days earlier. Cole explained the pharmacy error, the system failures, the crisis that had pushed a 2-month-old baby to the edge of failure to thrive. His voice remained steady until he reached the part about finding Naomi nursing their son, when something raw crept into his tone that Victoria had never heard before. Another woman fed our baby, Victoria said, the words hanging in the air between them like a challenge or an accusation. The postpartum therapy had taught her to name her emotions clearly, but this feeling had no clean category. Betrayal mixed with relief. Gratitude tangled with inadequacy. The knowledge that someone else had succeeded where she had failed. She saved him, Cole replied. While we were failing at everything that mattered, she chose to risk her job to keep our son alive. Victoria's hands shook as she processed the implications. During her darkest moments at Meadowbrook, when the postpartum depression had convinced her that she was fundamentally broken as a mother, another woman had been providing the nourishment she couldn't give. The irony felt both devastating and oddly liberating. I want to meet her, Victoria said, not as an employer, as a mother. The conversation happened in the kitchen where Cole had revolutionized their household hierarchy 3 days earlier. Naomi sat across from Victoria with the careful dignity of someone who understood she was being evaluated, but refused to apologize for her choices. Thank you, Victoria said, the words emerging from some deep place that therapy had helped her access. I know what it cost you to help him. I know what it might have cost you if my husband had reacted differently. Naomi's response came without hesitation. Any mother would have done the same thing. No, Victoria corrected gently. Any good mother would have wanted to. Most would have risked everything to actually do it. She paused, studying the woman who had stepped into the gap her own illness had created. You cared for my child when I couldn't care for myself. That's not something I take lightly. The complexity of the moment settled between them. Two women bound together by their love for the same child, their experiences of motherhood intertwining in ways no contract could have anticipated or prevented. Cole watched this exchange with the wonder of someone witnessing his wife emerge from the fog that consumed her for weeks. The Victoria who had entered the postpartum facility was barely functional, haunted by birth trauma and convinced of her own inadequacy. The woman sitting in their kitchen was choosing gratitude over resentment, growth over retreat. The household has changed, Cole told her later as they put Theo down for his afternoon nap. The staff, the policies, the way we think about our responsibilities to the people who work for us. I've changed. Victoria studied his face, recognizing the man she'd married beneath the CEO persona that had calcified over years of success. Good, she said simply. I was hoping we both would. Her choice crystallized in that moment, not between competing versions of motherhood, but between competing visions of their family's future. She could retreat into the safe boundaries of employer-employee relationships, or she could embrace the messier, more human connections that had saved her son's life. She chose connection. She chose growth. She chose the harder path that led toward wholeness rather than the easier one that led toward control. Type mother, if you believe love has many forms. March 8, 2024. Albany, New York. Room 124 of the Legislative Office building buzzed with particular energy of democracy in action, lawmakers, advocates, and citizens gathering to debate Assembly Bill A7842, the Enhanced Domestic Workers' Rights Act. Naomi Johnson sat at the witness table, her hand steady on the microphone that would carry her voice to decision-makers across New York State. 3 weeks earlier, she'd been organizing closets and maintaining schedules. Today, she was testifying about the gap between legal protections and lived reality for the 200,000 domestic workers employed throughout New York. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had unfolded through conversations with Cole about policy reform, research sessions with labor rights attorneys, and late-night phone calls with other household employees who'd faced similar impossible choices. My name is Naomi Johnson, she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who discovered that her experience mattered beyond her employer's penthouse. 3 weeks ago, I broke my employment contract to save a child's life. Today, I'm here to talk about why contracts that criminalize compassion need to change. Her testimony wove together personal narrative and policy analysis with the skill of someone who'd spent years observing how power operated from the margins. She spoke about the intimate contact clauses that prevented emergency care, the NDAs that silence workers who witness neglect, and the liability structures that prioritize legal protection over human welfare. Working mothers shouldn't have to choose between job security and moral responsibility, she continued. Household staff shouldn't be legally prohibited from providing emergency care to children in crisis. And families shouldn't depend on employees willing to risk termination to do what's right. In Harlem, Parker Johnson sat in his sister's living room, laptop balanced on his knees, watching his mother address legislators through the live stream that had drawn viewers from across the region. His 5-year-old vocabulary couldn't capture the complexity of what was happening, but his pride was unmistakable. That's my mama, he announced to anyone within earshot. She's talking to important people about helping babies. Naomi's advocacy work had grown organically from Cole's policy revolution. Her vision extended beyond individual household reforms to systematic change, donor milk education programs for low-income communities, lactation support networks for working mothers, emergency care protocols that protected both employees and employers. The New York State Domestic Workers Coalition had invited her to speak at conferences across the tri-state area. Labor law professors at Columbia requested interviews about the intersection of child care and worker rights. Social workers from the Administration for Children's Services sought her insights on emergency feeding protocols for at-risk infants. What had started as a crisis response was becoming a calling that reshaped how Naomi understood her place in the world. She was no longer just surviving economic precarity. She was actively working to change the systems that created that precarity for others. Cole's support operated behind the scenes with the same discretion he applied to all his philanthropic work. The Harrington Foundation quietly funded her travel expenses to speaking engagements. A scholarship program appeared for Parker's education without fanfare or publicity. Legal fees for policy research were covered through grants that traced back to Cole's network, but never directly to his name. "I don't want recognition," he'd told her when she discovered the funding sources. "I want change. Use whatever resources help you make that happen." The legislative hearing concluded with Assemblymember Maria Santos promising committee action on the Enhanced Domestic Workers' Rights Act within 60 days. Naomi packed her testimony notes with the satisfaction of someone who transformed personal crisis into systemic advocacy. Her phone buzzed with text from Parker. "Everyone at school says their mom saw you on the computer. You're famous." Fame wasn't the goal. Justice was. And for the first time in her life, Naomi Johnson had the platform and resources to pursue it effectively. March 15, 2024. The Harrington Foundation's press release landed in media inboxes at 9 a.m. sharp, but it read nothing like the carefully sanitized statements usually crafted by crisis communications firms. Cole had written it himself, rejecting 3 drafts from his PR team that buried the truth under corporate speak. "Last month, our household systems failed a 2-month-old baby so completely that an employee risked her livelihood to prevent him from starving," the statement began. "This isn't a story about contract violations or liability management. This is a story about what happens when policies designed to protect wealth end up endangering the children that wealth is supposed to nurture." The response erupted across social media within hours. #hunger is not appropriate trended nationally as parents shared their own experiences with feeding crises, formula shortages, and the gaps between pediatric emergencies and available resources. The hashtag became a rallying cry for maternal support networks and infant nutrition advocacy groups. But the backlash was equally swift. #PR stunt gained momentum as critics questioned Cole's motives, suggesting the transparency was calculated damage control rather than genuine accountability. Financial reporters dissected his foundation's tax filings, searching for evidence that the donations were publicity-driven rather than reform-minded. Cole's interview with Anderson Cooper became the defining moment of his public transformation. Gone was the carefully controlled CEO who'd spent 15 years managing his image through quarterly earnings calls and strategic philanthropy announcements. Instead, viewers saw a father struggling to articulate how wealth could become a barrier to basic human decency. "I built systems to protect my family from exposure," he told Cooper, his voice cracking slightly. "But those same systems almost killed my son because they prevented the people who cared about him from actually caring for him. That's not protection. That's isolation disguised as security." The donations that followed carried more weight than the press release. $2 million to the Human Milk Banking Association of North America for pasteurization equipment upgrades. $3 million to fund after-hours lactation consultation services at community health centers across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. $1 million to establish emergency formula funds at pediatric clinics serving low-income families. Victoria's Instagram Live session on March 20th shattered whatever remained of the family's carefully maintained privacy. Speaking directly to her phone's camera while Theo napped in her lap, she addressed 47,000 viewers about postpartum depression, birth trauma, and the shame that kept her silent during her son's crisis. "I want to tell other mothers something nobody told me," she said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone else love your child when you're too broken to do it yourself. That doesn't make you a failure. It makes you human." The comments section exploded with responses from women sharing their own postpartum struggles, their feeding difficulties, their gratitude for someone with platform and privilege choosing vulnerability over reputation management. The moment went viral not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. In a social media landscape saturated with curated perfection, Victoria's raw honesty about maternal inadequacy and marital rebuilding resonated with millions of parents who'd never had the resources to fail as publicly or recover as completely. 3 lives forever changed by one night of courage had become a catalyst for conversations about wealth, responsibility, and the price of protecting children from the very systems designed to serve them. August 15th, 2024. 6 months after a 2-month-old baby's cries shattered the boundaries of Billionaire's carefully constructed world, the Harrington penthouse hummed with a different kind of energy. Theo's laughter echoed through marble hallways as he reached for toys dangling from his play gym, his weight now comfortably in the 85th percentile, and his pediatrician's charts showing the steady upward curve that every parent dreams of seeing. Victoria sat in the renovated nursery, successfully breastfeeding their son for the first time since his birth. The journey back to nursing had required lactation consultants, hormone therapy, and months of patient rebuilding, but the connection she'd feared was lost forever had gradually returned. Her postpartum depression hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into manageable episodes supported by therapy, medication, and a marriage that now prioritized emotional honesty over operational efficiency. Naomi's new business card read, Family Advocate, a title that reflected her evolution from household employee to policy architect. Her office occupied what had once been Victoria's and used yoga studio, complete with filing cabinets full of advocacy research, a conference table for staff meetings that now included genuine collaboration, and a direct phone line to Cole's executive assistant for emergency consultations. The household contracts had been completely rewritten by a team that included employment attorneys, pediatric nurses, and current staff members whose lived experience informed every clause. Section 12 now contained the compassion protocols, detailed guidelines for emergency medical situations, clear chains of command for pediatric crises, and explicit protection for staff who prioritized child welfare over procedural compliance. The documents read like they'd been written by humans for humans rather than lawyers protecting assets. Other wealthy families began reaching out within weeks of Cole's public transformation. The questions arrived through discreet channels, private emails, mutual acquaintances, quiet conversations at charity galas. How do you balance security with humanity? How do you protect privacy while allowing genuine relationships? How do you create household policies that serve children rather than constraining the adults who care for them? The Harrington model became an unofficial template, shared through networks of family offices and estate managers who'd grown tired of managing households that felt more like luxury prisons and homes. Miles found himself consulting for other high-net-worth families, teaching a management philosophy that measured success through employee satisfaction surveys alongside traditional efficiency metrics. Parker Johnson's acceptance letter to the Manhattan Academy for Gifted Students arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. His scholarship funded through Cole's expanded education initiative that provided opportunities for children of domestic workers throughout the tri-state area. The program operated without fanfare or publicity, simply appearing as resources in communities that needed them most. Naomi picked up her son from his previous school for the last time, his excitement about advanced math classes and science labs bubbling over during their subway ride home. The apartment in Harlem remained unchanged. She'd chosen to stay in her community even as her professional opportunities expanded. But the stress that had once defined their daily routine had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like security. Miles had undergone his own quiet transformation, learning to manage with emotional intelligence rather than just operational precision. His morning briefings now included staff wellness checks alongside security updates. His metrics tracked employee retention and job satisfaction with the same attention once reserved for household efficiency ratings. The estate ran more smoothly than ever, but also felt more alive. The marriage between Cole and Victoria required daily choice rather than legal assumption. They attended couples therapy every Thursday, maintained individual treatment for their respective struggles with control and depression, and practiced a kind of intentional intimacy that trauma survivors must build brick by brick. Their Sunday morning routine had become sacred. Pancakes in the kitchen while Theo played in his bouncy seat, no phones or business discussions allowed. Just the simple pleasure of being present with each other without agenda or performance. The revolution that began with a hungry baby's cries had rippled outward into policy changes, personal transformations, and a redefinition of what it meant to use privilege responsibly. February 14th, 2025. 1 year to the day after Cole Harrington found his employee nursing his son, the penthouse hosted a birthday party that defied every convention of wealthy family celebrations. Theo's first birthday cake sat on the kitchen island where contracts had once been spread like evidence, surrounded by faces that told the story of how crisis can become catalysts for transformation. What happens when privilege finally meets responsibility? The question lingered in the air as three families, bound together by one night of impossible choices, watched a 1-year-old demolish chocolate frosting with particular joy that comes from being loved by an entire village. Parker Johnson, now 6 and thriving at Manhattan Academy, helped Theo navigate his smash cake while regaling anyone who'd listened with stories about his mom's appearances on TV. Victoria documented the chaos through her phone camera, her Instagram followers having grown accustomed to her radical honesty about motherhood, marriage, and the messy beauty of imperfect families. Miles Clayton raised a toast with sparkling cider, his transformation from rigid estate manager to emotional intelligence advocate still surprising him daily. The metrics he tracked now included laughter frequency and spontaneous hugs, alongside traditional efficiency measurements. But it was Naomi's reflection that captured the weight of everything that had changed. Standing in the nursery where she'd once risked everything to feed a hungry child, she held Theo as he babbled contentedly in her arms. "Sometimes breaking rules is the most moral thing you can do," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom earned through months of advocacy work and policy reform. "But you have to be willing to face the consequences. Most people aren't willing to risk their security for someone else's survival." Cole listened from the doorway, remembering the man he'd been 12 months earlier, someone who'd built wealth by controlling outcomes and managing variables. That version of himself would have seen Naomi's actions as liability and chaos. The man he'd become understood them as leadership and love. "I used to think trust was dangerous," he admitted, "that depending on other people's judgment would compromise my ability to protect my family. Turns out the opposite was true. The people closest to my son knew what he needed better than any system I could design." The final image of that evening remained etched in everyone's memory. 3 families connected by courage gathered around a kitchen table that had once been a battleground for competing definitions of safety and care. Theo asleep in his high chair, cake in his hair and contentment on his face. Parker showing Victoria pictures he'd drawn of the day my mama saved baby Theo. Cole and Naomi comparing notes about the latest legislative hearing on domestic worker protections. How many mothers still work in silence, constrained by contracts that criminalize compassion? How many children depend on adults brave enough to choose humanity over hierarchy? The questions that began in nursery at 2:17 a.m. have become a movement that stretched far beyond any single household's revolution. Some stories end with answers. This one ends with better questions and the courage to keep asking them. Type courage if you'd risk everything for what's right. For stories that challenge how we see power, privilege, and the price of doing right, subscribe and join a community that believes love always finds a way.